ladies and gentlemen. Please put your hands together for our next act, Rick Hudson.
When I came back to LA in 1994, I came back to this neighborhood. If there's a place you've been away from 7 years, but you elect to come back there, that says something about that community. I never moved back into the American Hotel again. There's kind of a joke I make sometimes. Yeah, I did my time in the American Hotel, but it's not really as bad as all that, and I would move back in here if the circumstances were right. What's happened in this neighborhood is some of the lovable losers and crazy characters that used to live here can't afford to live here anymore. They're still here, but there are not as many of them. It's been harder to make it in this community, but it's just what's been happening everywhere in our culture. The economy has changed. Dr. Jones didn't have any problem letting the facts keep him from telling a good story. You couldn't get a straight answer out of the guy. He was always embellishing for dramatic effect. He loved being enigmatic. He loved that you weren't quite sure what he meant when he wandered down to the bar in his silk pajamas. He was always trying to get a rise out of people. Don had a long life before I met him, but what I gleaned over the years was that he had always been a wheeler dealer of one kind or another. Years before, in the 60s and 70s, he had been, let's call him an antique dealer, but that's being generous because a lot of times what he probably sold as antiques were really faux antiques. But that's the kind of guy he was. He could buy an old, shoddy-looking box at a swap meet for $1.50, and he would come back and bring it downtown and show it to people and say that it was some jewelry case that the fifth cousin of the Russian count had given to his niece. Consummate bullshitter, but in a lovable sort of way. Joel Bloom played several different roles during his time in the community. He used to be the MC at Al's Bar for the No Talent Nights. He commanded the console, which meant he set the mic levels. He had the power of God. And this is when I think he was really at his best. The classic scene would be on No Talent Night when he had some god-awful act. And it was finally time that he could get rid of this awful act. And they would say, well, I'd like to do an encore if I may. And Joel Bloom would just cut the mic down and he'd interpose and say, I think not. Next. Get out of there, you bum. It was just classic Joel, the way he would just like shut him down. Joel Bloom was the kind of guy who was working on a shtick. The angry, grumpy guy. There was a particular kind of curmudgeon character that he had been working on for years, and he never missed an opportunity to perfect this character, even in the face of strangers. You saw in his store, the way to get in trouble with Joel Bloom was to go in and ask if you'd get change for $1. What the hell do you think? I go to the bank just to make you quarters? And he's the kind of guy who'd get pissed off if you asked him what time of day it was. What do you think I am, your watch piece? It was like trying to dance through a minefield, you know? Sometimes you got blown up, sometimes you didn't. They'd say, go to Joel Bloom's. I put down with every purchase. Joel Bloom wrote a play that was intended to be performed in front of an audience seated in their cars. It's called Mayhem at Mayfield Mall. And it's basically a tongue-in-cheek parody of a 1950s B horror flick like The Blob. And he did this in the parking lot right next to the American Hotel. In this production, I volunteered to be the house manager, which means that basically I was a parking attendant. Instead of seating people in seats, we had to direct people where to park their car. Joel Bloom had a problem with Actors' Equity, the actors union. The union heard about this production and they applied a rule They calculate that you could get more than 100 people in to see the show. Therefore, it didn't qualify for a waiver, and he was required to pay them full scale for his actors. But he tried to tell the local union, you don't understand, the audience is sitting in cars. I could never get 100 audience members seated in cars in this tiny parking space. He had to actually fly to New York to the national chapter of Actors Equity and appeal to the national board. He didn't have to argue very long. They conferred for just a few minutes and called him back in, and they said, yes, we're perfectly happy to grant your exemption. And by the way, it's the most interesting theater idea we've heard in a long time. Years later, that production had stuck in the back of my mind, even after I was with the circus. And when I had an opportunity to produce a play, this was the one I wanted to do, but on a bigger scale. In the late 90s, after I was back in the neighborhood, I was helping with a local small theater group called Wolfskill. But there was one production I always wanted to do. It had been in the back of my head for a long time. Mayhem at Mayfield Mall, this drive-in play. In 1998, I got Joel Blow to update the script, and we produced it at a lot near the 6th Street Bridge, about a mile from here. Again, we used an empty lot with cars parked. I could tell the audience to tune their car radio to a particular station, and they could hear everything on stage.
Let me remind you of the very real possibility of endangering the public with the toxic waste dump festering beneath this mall.
I learned something about entertainment. What you need is a good gimmick. I got so much free publicity.
The appetite here is for drive-in drama. Producer Richard Hudson and dozens of his theatrical friends built a stage at one end of a parking lot that fits 24 cars. No chairs, just cars, combining the logistics of a drive-in movie and an outdoor play.
Associated Press picked it up and ran it on their wires. I had cast members telling me, oh yeah, my grandmother called me from South Dakota. She said they were reading about our drive-in drama in her local paper. So we started getting calls from all kinds of people. And one of the girls who was in the play, I hired her to work full-time on PR. Tamar Fortgang did an incredible job of promoting this. We were interviewed on NPR. Joel and I had our photos in People magazine. We were on Good Morning America.
There's a funny time that happens to our audience. They say, oh my gosh, I can't believe this. This is the nuttiest thing. I'm watching a play in my car and I'm listening to it on my car radio, and they just can't believe it.
That was just because of the gimmick. If you really want to do entertainment and you want to get lots of free press, have a great gimmick. The changes in this neighborhood that have occurred since the 90s, they just mirror what's been happening in society at large. Most of the people nowadays, they come home to their high-priced studio loft, they get out of their car, they arm their Beamer, they go right indoors, and they go upstairs, lock the door behind them, and then go turn on their computer and turn themselves into their little personal pleasure dome. A lot of people just live that sort of crowded isolation that is so prevalent in modern society. People are actually less communal than they used to be. When this community was first discovered by artists, these were derelict and abandoned properties. The artists and everybody who followed and built this arts district turned empty factory buildings into thriving work and live spaces. It was a strategic mistake when we tried to define the boundaries of the arts district. Once you do that to your arts community, you commodify it. You turn your neighborhood, which was a community of spirit, a community of individuals, a community of mind, into a list of acceptable addresses. You've given up ownership of your arts community, and you've given it to the local property owners. And they buy and sell it as a commodity to the artsy crowd that wants to buy a lifestyle off the rack. I wish that our city elders, the powers that be, would, instead of just saying, well, thank you very much, but the property owners will take it from here, if they would do this in other parts of the city that are currently underutilized. It seems like there's a big lack of imagination. The American Hotel is actually good for as long as it stands up. Nothing is going to happen to the American Hotel, and I can say that easily without reservation. These rooms are now $500 for a 100 square foot room. That means the property owners are making $5 a square foot. There's nothing the current property owners could do to make more money per square foot. So I see no reason why they would change. Nobody's gonna destroy the goose that lays the golden egg. Until the next earthquake destroys this place is always going to be the American Hotel.
Cut.